The sky above Dretheus 4 looked more like a wound than a firmament, streaked in violent shades of smoke and ash where orbital bombardments had burned the upper atmosphere. The ground was no better. Charred plains stretched in every direction, dotted with skeletal husks of machines too broken to be dismantled and too sacred to be buried. For Commander Ralvek, these sights no longer shocked, only weighed heavier upon shoulders that had already forgotten what rest felt like. He stood at the edge of the command platform, his ridged hands clasped behind him, eyes locked on the horizon where enemy banners would soon advance again. Behind him, the War Council spoke in hushed tones, the voices of men who had seen their legions gutted and their cities fall silent. Every sentence was a plea disguised as strategy. Ralvek listened with one ear, his mind already tallying what resources remained. Ammunition, dwindling. Fuel, nearly exhausted. Spirit, on the brink of collapse. Zoran, the chief military engineer, shuffled closer, datapads clutched against his chest. His gaunt frame looked as though it had been hollowed by despair, though his eyes still gleamed with the stubborn intelligence of a man who had once believed machines could outlast any war. He spoke with the brittle clarity of one who knew his own words were a death sentence. The Northern artillery grid has failed again, Commander. Its conduits are fused beyond repair. Even if we cannibalize the Western bunkers, they will not last more than a day under fire. We can hold for perhaps a week, at most. The silence that followed felt heavier than the smoke-choked air. Ralvek did not flinch, though he felt his chest constrict, as if the planet itself was trying to crush him. A week. 7 days before the Kryn dominions swept the last of their resistance from Dretheus 4. 7 days before centuries of their civilization were reduced to ruins under alien boots. The war had not always been so hopeless. The Talrek had once stood tall, their fleets bristling with energy cannons and their armies clad in armor that shimmered like polished obsidian. But the Kryn had not conquered them through brute strength alone. They had worn them down, campaign after campaign, until every fortress became a tomb, every triumph bled into another retreat. Now, even the proudest soldiers looked less like warriors and more like ghosts, wearing uniforms. Zoran placed one of the datapads on the command table, its holograms flickering weakly. Machines fail faster than we can fix them. Our technology has grown too precise, too dependent on specialists. We built devices no ordinary soldier could mend. When they fall, they stay fallen. The Kryn know this, and they grind us down by breaking what we cannot restore. Ralvek's mandibles clicked once, an old reflex of frustration. He hated hearing truths he could not change. He hated more that Zoran was right. Too many times he had watched his men huddle behind silent guns, waiting for death to come because their machines had abandoned them. "We have endured worse," he said, though the words tasted false even in his own mouth. "We will endure again." The council gave him nothing but silence. In that silence, a thought stirred, a report he had dismissed earlier as nonsense. A scouting party had spoken of finding an off-worldly near the abandoned supply depot south of the cliffs. A wanderer, unarmed, carrying tools rather than weapons. No one had paid it much mind. Deserters, scavengers, even refugees were not uncommon near ruined territories. Yet the scouts had insisted the figure was unusual. Ralvek had ignored it then, but now, with the walls of inevitability closing around him, the memory gnawed at him like an insect he could not swat. He turned to Zoran, the stranger at the southern depot. "Do you know of him?" The engineer blinked, startled. "A rumor, Commander. They say he carries no armor, no rifle. Merely a wrench. Likely a drifter, perhaps deranged." "A man with a wrench," Ralvek repeated, almost to himself. It sounded absurd. But absurdity had its own kind of power in a world that had forgotten hope. He looked back out at the horizon, where smoke still smoldered like the dying breath of giants. If the war truly had only a week left, then perhaps even the smallest, most foolish spark deserved to be tested. "Send for him," Ralvek ordered. The council shifted uneasily, but no one objected. After all, what harm could one drifter do when the end was already certain? Yet something in Zoran's expression betrayed a flicker of curiosity, a faint stirring of the same question that now haunted Ralvek. Why would a man wander into a battlefield armed with nothing but the simplest tool? As the order was carried out, Ralvek allowed himself one final glance at the broken skyline. The Kryn would come soon, and Drethius 4 would burn. But for the first time in weeks, the commander felt the smallest tremor of anticipation, as if fate had shifted its weight by a fraction. Perhaps the war could not be won. Perhaps. Yet a part of him whispered otherwise, daring him to believe in the impossible. And so, when the stranger arrived, Ralvek would be waiting. "You said." The stranger was led into the command hall with the awkward gait of a man who belonged neither to this planet nor its war. He looked ordinary at first glance, broad-shouldered, weather-beaten, his clothes patched with the rough precision of someone who valued function over form. Yet there was something disarming in his calm presence, as though he walked into a chamber of hardened officers without realizing the weight of their despair. A simple metal tool hung from his belt, dulled by use. A wrench, scuffed and unremarkable. Commander Ralvek studied him in silence, his soldiers bristling with quiet disbelief. The human met their alien stares without fear or arrogance, only a farmer's steady patience. "Name?" Ralvek demanded, his voice carrying the edge of command that brooked no hesitation. "John Harker," the man replied, his accent rough and plain. "Just a farmer. Grew wheat back home. Fixed my own machines when they broke. Been wandering since a jump gate malfunction dropped me here." He shrugged as though this explanation required no further justification. Zoran tilted his head, peering at the wrench like it was a relic from another age. "And what makes you think a farmer with a scrap of metal belongs in a war council?" John's eyes flicked to him, calm and unflinching. "Didn't say I belonged. Just heard you've got machines falling apart faster than you can fix them. Where I come from, if your tractor breaks in the middle of harvest, you don't wait for specialists. You patch it, hammer it, curse at it, and keep it running till the job's done." A ripple of derision spread among the soldiers. One barked a laugh, another muttered that this was madness. Yet Ralvek did not dismiss him. He had seen too many proud warriors reduced to ash by the Dominion. Pride was no shield. Sometimes, survival meant reaching for anything, even the absurd. "You claim you can fix what our engineers cannot." Ralvek pressed. John hooked a thumb at his wrench. "I don't claim much. Machines are machines. Doesn't matter if it's an old combine or a plasma cannon, they all break down for the same reasons. Rust, friction, overcomplication. Show me something dead, and I'll see if I can make it breathe again." There was something in his tone, not boastful, not meek, but matter-of-fact, as though he had lived his life by that simple creed. Against his better judgment, Ralvek gestured for Zoran to bring him to the northern artillery grid. The engineer balked at first, but curiosity outweighed skepticism. Together, they led the human through the blackened corridors, past soldiers who stopped and stared at the sight of an outsider walking freely among them. Whispers followed like a draft of air. The off-worlder, the farmer, the man with the wrench. When they arrived, the artillery cannon loomed in silence, its conduits fused, its energy cores dark. It had been a monument to despair for months, another reminder that their technology had become too fragile for war. Zoran rattled off its failures in rapid detail, more to demonstrate the impossibility of repair than to inform the human. John ignored the commentary. He laid a hand on the cannon's metal hide, then crouched to pry open a panel with practiced ease. Inside, the intricate guts of alien machinery glowed faintly, wires tangled like veins in a dead body. He whistled low. "You people build things pretty. Too pretty. Like making a plow out of glass." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a strip of worn cloth, and wiped dust from the components. Then he began working, loosening bolts, tightening connections, cleaning corrosion with the edge of his sleeve. His movements lacked the precision of a trained engineer, but they carried the assurance of someone who had solved countless small failures with the tools at hand. Minutes stretched. Zoran leaned closer, eyes narrowing as John twisted a pair of conduits together that no manual would have approved. Sparks jumped. The cannon's belly hummed, faint but growing. With one final strike of the wrench against a misaligned plate, the machine roared awake. Energy surged through its core, lights flaring to life, and for the first time in months the cannon's barrel glowed with readiness. The alien soldiers who had gathered nearby staggered back, disbelief etched into their faces. A silence fell, broken only by the thrum of resurrected power. Zoran's voice cracked. Impossible, you bypassed 3 safety regulators, crossed conduits that cannot be crossed. John stood, wiping his hands on his trousers. All that matters is it works. Your machine isn't sacred. It's a tool. Treat it like one, and it'll serve. The murmurs began again, but this time there was awe woven into them. A weapon long thought dead had been restored by an outsider who claimed to be nothing more than a farmer. Ralvek approached, his expression unreadable. One cannon will not win us this war. No, John agreed, his tone steady. But it's a start. And if you've got more broken things, I'll fix them. Not because I know your technology, because I know when something's broken, you don't throw it away. You make it work until it can't anymore. The commander studied him, weighing truth against desperation. What he saw was not the brilliance of a savior, nor the strength of a warrior, but the resilience of a man who refused to bow to failure. Perhaps that was exactly what they needed. By the time night cloaked the base, word had spread like fire through dry fields. Soldiers whispered that the human with the wrench had brought a cannon back from the dead. Some scoffed, others clung to it as if hope itself had been rekindled. Zoran lingered by John's side, eyes alight with both suspicion and reluctant admiration, already peppering him with questions. Ralvek returned to his command platform, the echo of the cannon's hum still ringing in his ears. The Dominion would come soon, relentless and overwhelming. Yet for the first time in countless weeks, when he looked upon the horizon, he did not see only the certainty of defeat. He saw a chance, faint and fragile, carried in the calloused hands of a farmer who wielded nothing but a wrench. The war was not won. Not yet. But perhaps, just perhaps, it was no longer already lost. You said. The days that followed felt like the first stirring of life in a body long presumed dead. Where silence had lingered, the sound of machines slowly awakening filled the encampments. John Harker moved from site to site with his wrench hanging loosely at his side, a man unhurried but never idle. Soldiers watched him as though he were some half-believed tale made flesh, though his demeanor betrayed nothing of grandeur. He never called himself an engineer, never pretended to understand the intricacies of alien technology. He simply treated each ruined device the way he would have treated a tractor on his farm, an obstinate tool in need of coaxing rather than reverence. Zoran followed him with restless fascination, recording every motion, every improvised adjustment. Where once the engineer had spoken with the weary monotone of a man resigned to defeat, now his voice carried urgency. He pressed John with questions. Why bridge power through exposed wiring? Why strip components from one machine to patch another? Why bend rules that had been sacred since the machines were first designed? John's answers were always blunt, sometimes laced with humor. Because it keeps the damn thing running, he would say, or because the field doesn't care about your regulations, it only cares that the plow moves. Ralvek observed these changes from a distance. His command demanded caution, demanded skepticism, yet he could not deny the results. Walkers that had stood like rusted statues now lumbered across the parade ground. Drones once piled in heaps took flight again, their rotors patched with scrap plating. Even the simplest repairs seemed to swell the morale of his men, as though the human's wrench carried a magic their weapons had forgotten. The true magic, Ralvek suspected, lay not in the wrench, but in the man's refusal to accept that broken meant finished. His people had grown so dependent on specialists that when their machines failed, entire squads were paralyzed. John disrupted that chain of helplessness. He demanded soldiers learn to perform small tasks themselves, how to twist a line back into place, how to clear a jammed firing chamber, how to improvise with whatever metal lay within reach. Many resisted at first, their pride wounded by the notion of common work. But when they saw cannons roaring again, they listened. Each day, the Kryn tested their defenses. Scouts probed, skirmishers struck, and the thunder of distant bombardments shook the earth. Each time, weapons that had once fallen silent now answered in kind. For the first time in months, the defenders fired back with consistency. It was not enough to claim victory, but it was enough to slow the sense of inevitable collapse. Still, Ralvek wrestled with unease. Hope was fragile, and he feared it might shatter as quickly as it had reemerged. In a private moment, he confronted the human as John worked beneath the chassis of a crippled mech. "Do you understand the weight you place on us?" Ralvek asked, voice low but sharp. "These men believe you can mend what years of war have broken. If you fail, their faith will fall with you." John slid out from beneath the machine, wiping grime from his hands. He met the commander's gaze with quiet steadiness. "I'm no savior, Commander. I don't fight wars, I mend what's in front of me. You've got soldiers. You've got courage. All I do is keep the tools in your hands from falling apart. That's enough for me." It was not the speech of a warrior, yet it carried a truth Ralvek could not ignore. A leader need not wield a sword if he could give others the means to fight. He left John to his work, unsettled but strangely reassured. Zoran, by contrast, seemed transformed. Where once he had treated machinery like scripture, he now treated it as puzzle and clay, shaping under John's unorthodox lessons. Late into the nights, he and the farmer worked side by side, tearing down broken engines, rebuilding them with parts never intended to fit, and laughing at their own mistakes before trying again. The bond between them grew not from shared heritage, but from shared defiance against despair. Yet victory remained distant. Reports came of the Kryn assembling a massive force beyond the Black Hollow, preparing for a final assault meant to crush Drethius IV in a single strike. The Dominion had grown aware that the resistance had found its second wind, and they meant to snuff it out before it spread. Ralvek knew their patched army would face annihilation when that tide rolled forward. One evening, as soldiers gathered around the hum of repaired generators, John sat apart, staring at the wrench in his hands. The noise of laughter and renewed spirit washed over him, yet his expression held a shadow. Zoran found him there, silent, and asked what troubled him. "I can fix machines," John said softly, "but machines don't win wars. I can patch them till my hands break, but when the Kryn come with their fleets and armies, it won't be enough. I'm just a farmer. I don't know how to win something this big." For the first time, Zoran saw not a man of unshakable resolve, but a weary human far from home, carrying burdens he had not asked for. The engineer placed a hand on his shoulder, claws clicking gently against fabric. "You've given us something greater than weapons. You've given us the will to fight again. That is more dangerous to the Kryn than any fleet." John said nothing, but a faint smile tugged at the edge of his mouth, as if comforted yet unconvinced. He looked back at the wrench, then tightened his grip, as though drawing strength from the cold metal. The next dawn brought grim tidings. Kryn forces on the march, massing in numbers the defenders could scarcely imagine. Dust rose in dark clouds over the plains, the herald of an oncoming storm. Soldiers scrambled to their stations, patched weapons powered up, and the alien encampment braced itself. Ralvek stood upon the command platform, watching the horizon with a hard, unblinking stare. His army was battered, pieced together with salvage and stubborn will, but it stood. Behind him, John adjusted a set of field repairs on a cannon, his wrench gleaming dully in the weak light. When the Dominion finally descended upon them, the true measure of this fragile resurgence would be tested. Would the patched machines hold? Would the rekindled morale endure under fire? The question pressed upon every heart, and no man could answer it yet. But for the first time since the war had begun, they faced the coming storm not as a broken people waiting to die, but as a force that believed survival, perhaps even victory, was possible. And it was the farmer, the stranger with the wrench, who had made them believe. "You said." The first thunder of the Kryn advance shook the ground like the heartbeat of a giant. Across the plains of Black Hollow, their formations surged forward, armored vehicles grinding over ash and rubble, their banners shimmering in the smoke-streaked air. The sky above churned with enemy craft, wings blotting out the weak sun. From the command ridge, Commander Ralvek watched it all with grim composure, his mandibles tightening as though clamped on steel. This was the reckoning he had anticipated, the storm meant to finish what years of war had begun. Along the defensive line, alien soldiers braced themselves behind patched fortifications, hands gripping weapons that had been dead months earlier but now thrummed with life. Their breaths were sharp, their gazes fierce. The camp no longer resembled a tomb. It was a forge, heated by defiance. And at its center, moving from cannon to cannon with unhurried determination, was John Harker. His clothes were stained with oil and soot, his wrench nicked and scarred, yet he carried himself with the same patient steadiness he had brought into the command hall days ago. The first wave struck. Dominion bombardments lit the sky in a violent cascade, shells raining down, fire consuming the earth. Yet the artillery grid answered. Once silent, now alive with a vengeance. The cannon John had resurrected belched energy into the horizon, tearing through the ranks of advancing war machines. Drones lifted into the air, their patched rotors spinning true, intercepting enemy craft in mid-flight. For every weapon the Kryn broke, another sputtered back to life under the hands of soldiers who had learned from the farmer to mend and improvise. Zoran raced from station to station, shouting instructions born from John's unorthodox lessons. Patch with whatever you have, metal, cloth, bone if you must. The machines are not holy, they are ours. His once cautious tone now rang with conviction, igniting his comrades' determination. Soldiers laughed through the chaos as their weapons roared back when the enemy expected silence, and each repaired machine felt like a strike against inevitability itself. Still, the Dominion pressed harder. Their flagship hovered above the field, its shield casting a shimmering dome of invulnerability as it directed the assault. Ralvek saw the truth with a soldier's clarity. No matter how hard his men fought, as long as that shield stood, defeat remained certain. He summoned Zoran and John to his side. The heart of their force is that flagship, Ralvek said, his voice as sharp as the blades strapped to his armor. We break it, and their line falters. We fail, and this world burns. Zoran nodded, his eyes fierce. John tightened his grip on his wrench, glancing up at the massive vessel. Then we'll break it, one way or another. Under the cover of artillery fire, the three pushed into the chaos, weaving through burning wreckage and clashing soldiers until they reached a Dominion transport smashed open by cannon fire. From there, they fought their way into the flagship itself, a labyrinth of humming corridors and polished steel. The Kryn within fought with mechanical discipline, but desperation gave Ralvek's blade and Zoran's rifle a ferocity that carved a path. John followed close, wrench swinging when needed, a crude but effective weapon in close quarters. At last they reached the shield generator chamber, a vast cathedral of machinery, alive with pulsating energy. The systems were elegant, precise, incomprehensible even to Zoran's trained eye. He swore under his breath, his hands trembling as he scanned the controls. It's beyond us. Too intricate. Even if I had a cycle to study. John cut him off with a half-smile, already stepping forward. Intricate's just another word for fragile. He crouched, examining the web of conduits and coolant lines. Where Zoran saw perfection, John saw flaws, valves strained to bursting, coolant systems clogged with redundancy, panels sealed more for ceremony than function. He tapped one pipe with his wrench, listening to the hollow ring. There. That's your weak spot. Before Ralvek or Zoran could stop him, John jammed the wrench into the valve and twisted with all his weight. Metal shrieked, coolant burst forth in a torrent of steam, and alarms screamed across the chamber. The generator convulsed, sparks erupting as its carefully balanced systems collapsed under the sudden imbalance. Energy flared, then buckled. The shield around the flagship shimmered, cracked, and finally fell. Outside, the Talrek artillery seized the opening. Cannons poured fire into the exposed hull, ripping through the Dominion flagship with vengeful precision. In moments, The great vessel became a falling star, crashing into the plains in a firestorm that shook the battlefield. The sight turned the tide. Kryn forces, disciplined but not unbreakable, faltered. Their coordination crumbled without the flagship's command. Ralvek's army surged forward, voices rising in a thunderous roar. What had been a battle of survival became, impossibly, a victory. When the dust settled, Black Hollow was littered with wreckage, but the Dominion had retreated. The Talrec stood bloodied yet unbowed, gazes lifted to the horizon not with despair, but with hard-won pride. Soldiers gathered around Jon, their cheers echoing across the battlefield. Some lifted their weapons skyward, others simply chanted a single word: "Wrench! Wrench!" Jon accepted none of it. He slipped quietly from the crowd, sitting on a broken hull with his tool across his knees. His expression was tired, lined with the weight of a man who had not sought glory. Zoran approached, eyes still wide with the aftershock of triumph. "You've given us back more than weapons," he said. "You've given us back belief." Ralvek joined them, his armor scorched, his stance unshaken. He looked at Jon with something rare for a commander hardened by endless war, respect untainted by skepticism. "You turned despair into defiance. You gave us the means to stand when we had already fallen. You are no farmer now, Jon Harker. You are the man who saved a world." Jon shook his head, adjusting his grip on the battered wrench. "I'm still just a farmer. Farmers mend what's broken, keep things alive until the harvest is done. That's all I did here." Ralvek placed a hand on his shoulder, heavy and solemn. "Perhaps. But remember this, wars are not always won by warriors. Sometimes they are won by those who refuse to let things stay broken." As the soldiers began to rebuild their defenses and gather their wounded, the sky cleared slightly, a pale sun breaking through the ash. Jon looked up at it, his expression distant, as though seeing fields he might never walk again. Yet in his quiet heart, he knew his place was here until the work was done. The war was not over. The Kryn would return, relentless as the tide. But Drithius 4 no longer stood as a crumbling fortress awaiting its end. It stood as a world defiant, a world reborn through grit, stubbornness, and the hands of a farmer with a wrench.